A Chocolate Chip Cookie Murder, Chapter 8, Part 1. Hannah woke up with a start. She'd been having a nightmare, and Norman Rhodes, an insane dentist with a drill that sounded like a dump truck backing up, had been grinding her teeth. Since she'd refused to unclench her jaw, he'd been doing his evil dentistry right through her cheek. When she opened her eyes, she was relieved to find that it was only Moish licking her face with his sandpaper tongue to wake her. The alarm clock was serenading her with its irritating electronic beep, and Hannah moved Moish over so that she could reach out and shut it off. It was still dark outside, but the security light on the side of the building had come on. Since it detected any type of motion, Hannah figured that it had been set off by a winter bird that had swooped down to peck at the birdseed belt she'd hung outside her window. Okay, I'm getting up. I know it's feed the kitty time. Hannah lifted her head from the warm comfort of her pillow and sat up in bed. She dangled her feet over the side of the mattress and searched with her toes for the pair of slippers she kept there. She nabbed one, then the other, and wiggled her feet into the grey scuffs that had once been powder blue. When she got to the kitchen, the coffee was ready, and Hannah gave thanks for the timer she'd rigged to the kitchen outlet. Some of the older women in Lake Eden called strong black coffee Swedish plasma, and Hannah agreed with that definition. She couldn't even think, much less function, until she downed at least a cup. She poured herself a mug of the steaming, caffeine-laden brew, threw some kitty crunches into Moish's bowl, and sat down at the table. There was something very important on the docket for today. Hannah took a big gulp of her coffee, hoping to dispel the morning cobwebs that had gathered in her head during the night. It wasn't a new catering job. She had her schedule set for this week. The sound of loud chewing roused Hannah from her zombie-like state, and she turned to look at Moish. His kitty crunchies were living up to their name. He was chomping so hard, he sounded as if he might break a tooth. And Ron's tooth, that's it! Moish gave her a startled look, and then he buried his head in his food bowl again. Hannah grinned. He probably thought she was crazy for hollering out loud, but she just remembered what Tracy had told her right before she discovered Ron's body. Tracy had said she'd waved at Ron and he'd given her a funny smile. People who'd just come from the dentist had funny smiles, especially if the dentist had given them a shot of Novocaine. And Danielle had said that she'd urged Ron to go to the dentist. Hannah reached out for the yellow pad she kept on the kitchen table and jotted down a note to herself. Call every dentist in town. Did they see Ron yesterday morning? Then she grinned at what she'd written. Every dentist? There were only two dentists in Lake Eden, Doc Bennett and Norman Rhodes. Doc Bennett was retired, but he still kept a few of his former patients in enamel, and Hannah hoped that Ron had been one of them. She certainly wasn't looking forward to the prospect of calling Norman. He might think that she was following up on her mother's attempt at matchmaking, and nothing could be further from the truth. It took a second mug of coffee, but at last Hannah felt she was ready to face the morning. She added a second note to her first. Drive to Twin Pines to check out the bouncer. And then she pushed back her chair. It was time to get ready for work. Since she never ate breakfast, Hannah was usually ready to go in record time. She made quick work of her shower, dressed in faded jeans and a flowered sweater shirt, and hurried back to the kitchen to fast-forward through the messages on her answering machine. They were all from her mother. Dolores sounded like a talking chipmunk at the increased speed playback, and Hannah was amused. She knew she'd have to return her mother's calls eventually, but that could wait until she got to the cookie jar. See you tonight, Moish. Hannah grabbed her keys from the corkboard next to the phone and glanced at the African violet as she passed by the table. Its leaves were turning yellow, and it looked in imminent danger of becoming mulch. She shrugged into her bomber jacket and snatched up the plant, carrying it with her out the door. Lisa was a wizard with plants. She might be able to resuscitate it. It wasn't until Hannah was approaching the dairy that it hit her, and she winced as she drove past the white cinder block building with a huge cozy cow sire on the roof. Ron was gone. She'd never see him loading his truck again. That was a sobering thought, and Hannah almost blew off the stop sign at the corner of Main and 3rd. She managed to brake just in time and smiled guiltily at Herb Beesman, who was lurking in the alley by the cut and curl. Herb just shook his finger in a good-natured no-no gesture, and Hannah breathed a sigh of relief. Herb was being very nice this morning. He could have given her a ticket for reckless driving, but he seemed more amused than angry. The molasses crackers she'd given him yesterday afternoon had been a very good investment. As she turned the corner and drove into the alley behind a shop, Hannah wondered who'd hauled away Ron's truck. Max Turner would be livid if it had been impounded and he was one truck short for his delivery routes. She steered a wide berth around the place where Ron had been shot and gave a fleeting thought to the difference between the fronts of the shops and the backs. There were no decorative planters in the alley for shrubbery or flowers, no plate glass windows for display and signs. The backs of the shops were institutional-looking, just parking spaces, dumpsters, and blank walls with small doors set in at regular intervals. It wasn't a nice place to die, but that raised another question. Was there a nice place to die? And did it really matter to the deceased? Morbid thinking was getting her nowhere, and Hannah drove on down the alley. If Ron had been killed on the street, there might have been witnesses, but the alley was usually deserted, and she hadn't seen any activity when she'd driven in yesterday morning. Even though she hadn't been paying much attention, Hannah was sure she would have noticed if there had been anyone prowling around the dumpsters or standing near any of the doorways. The only other person she'd seen yesterday had been Claire Rogers. As Hannah unlocked her back door, she decided she'd have a chat with Claire. Bill or one of the other deputies must have already interviewed her, but it couldn't hurt to ask a few more questions. Hannah had the perfect excuse to talk to Claire. Just as soon as she mixed up her cookie dough, she'd dash next door and take a look at the cocktail dress that Claire had seemed so eager to sell to her. She switched on the lights, fired up the ovens, and headed for the sink. After she'd slipped on her paper cap and given her hands a thorough scrub, Hannah reached for the book of laminated recipes that hung on a hook by the sink. She was catering the Lake Eden Regency Romance Club meeting at 4 this afternoon, and she needed to make a batch of her Regency ginger crisps. Hannah read through the recipe before she began to work. She also used an erasable felt-tipped marker to check off the ingredients as she added them to the bowl. It was possible to leave out a critical ingredient when she was distracted, and Hannah was definitely distracted. She couldn't stop thinking about Ron's murder and the clues she had gathered in the past 24 hours. The way she saw it, they had two suspects, Coach Watson and the unidentified bouncer at Twin Pines. Both of them had possible motives to kill Ron.